friends, how are you? Welcome to Changing Tracks. Today we have Alex with us. How are you, Alex? Welcome to the program. How's it going? It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, your adolescence?
Yeah, sure. So growing up, there are three of us kids in my family. I'm the youngest of three, an older brother and an older sister. And we would pray together at meals. We would go to Mass together on Sundays. Going to Mass was never an option. That was something we always just knew that we were going to do on Sundays. And I remember that it was being something good. It was just a time to come together as a family. So in that way, my family was always very close. And as far as faith, it was important. We didn't necessarily pray the rosary together or chaplets of Divine Mercy, or our devotional life was pretty minimal. But faith was always very important. So going to Mass, and went to Catholic school from the time I was a little kid to the time I graduated from high school. So faith was important in that way.
During that time in elementary school and high school, do you think that your faith was your own, or was it something imposed on you?
So I think as far as a relationship goes, that came probably after my freshman year, my first year of high school, because I went on a Christian leadership retreat, kind of like it was a workshop, but that was really when the idea of a friendship with our Lord became more apparent. But it wasn't until I had been in college for a year before I entered the seminary, before I really, I would say, developed a love and a friendship with Our Lady. So it was a gradual process over 4 or 5 years. It's neat though, because when I look at pictures, from journal entries in high school, I realized that I did have more faith than I thought before looking back. It was kind of being able to see that friendship. It was beautiful.
Can you tell us a little bit about your process of growing closer to the faith during your adolescence? Or maybe your attitude towards the faith in high school?
Sure. As far as my attitude towards faith was that it was important. So when I think back, I had really good friends in high school who unfortunately now aren't as practicing. But at the time, we used to go to Mass together on the weekends, and then afterwards we would cook dinner together and then hang out and stay over at each other's houses. So friendship was a big part of faith. But it was neat because that influenced my attitude towards it. It wasn't something I only had to do with my family, but it was something that I could do with my friends as well. So in that way, it was a good attitude because it was both family and friends together that we could share faith.
Can you say a little bit more about friendship and faith, or what would you say to young people so that they could come closer to the faith? Or how did you live this growing closer to the faith that you had experienced?
Sure. I think that friendship, there's the saying that friendships make or break someone. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because ultimately friendship with God is what all of us desire. So the friendships we have here on earth are so important because they point to the one who we ultimately want to be friends with in heaven. So I think that whether we have an ideal or an unideal friendship, in some way it points to God. So when you have a good friendship, and even if it's not necessarily a Catholic friendship, but there are just some really good qualities to it, it's helpful because it helps anyone grow closer to God, whether directly or indirectly. So for myself, that was huge, looking back, was having just good friends to help build just kind of a good-natured person. So for that, I'm very grateful to God.
Did you practice your faith in high school, or was it more like a friendship with the Lord? How would you define that relationship that you had with the faith at that time?
As far as prayer life, I would go to Mass on Sundays. I would serve Mass. I was also an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion at the end of high school, and also a lector. So I think my involvement in the way of praying was much more just an active kind of, I'm doing these things. They're not bad things, they're good things. But the way that I would pray was, my idea of prayer was not so much silence, but it was doing these things for the church or for God. So I guess more of an active prayer in that way. But as far as in my heart, there wasn't a whole lot of conversation with God, other than different retreats I had gone on, and that's when I would write in my journal. I look back and I can see those little conversations. But as far as a daily routine, it wasn't so much there.
Okay, can you tell us how your prayer life developed in your time at university? How did it change, maybe that life of prayer as a Catholic that you had in university?
So I went to college right after graduating high school, and I was there for a year at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I wanted to pursue business administration communication. And my plan was to either go into hospitality management or event planning. And I had that plan set for at least 2 years before that. So when I think of high school and getting into college, I was so set on exactly what I wanted to do and exactly how the next 5 or 10 years of my life would look. I would have a wife and so many kids, and I would have maybe this internship, which would lead to this job. So the idea of surrender was not in my mind at all. Very much, just clinging to what I wanted to do, while at the same time trying to offer that to God and saying, here's what I want to do, can you bless it, kind of thing. When I got to college, again, I had some really good friends. They were girls. The school I was at primarily had girls as opposed to guys. So it was hard in that I missed the fraternity of male, just brotherly friendship. But the women there in my life, looking back, taught me a lot, especially because one good friend in particular, I expressed to her that I really missed having guy friends, and she wrote in her journal that the day I told her that she asked God to bless me with male friendship, and then 9 months later I went to seminary. So it's cool, but she told me that after the fact. After I told her I was going to go to seminary, she said, well, I want to share with you what I wrote. And that was beautiful, because it was thinking, gosh, Claire was praying for me, and I had no idea. In an indirect way, just for male fraternity. So that was beautiful. And when I was at college that year, I was selfish, and I kept going to Mass on Sundays. I was involved as a lector and an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, but it was very surface level. I can remember I had a Holy Spirit prayer on my desk, and I would pray that usually when I studied, and that was the only kind of routine prayer I had, was to pray a prayer before I studied something. And then I would go to Mass on Sundays. But otherwise, I think any kind of relationship I'd had with God, it was kind of like setting him up on a shelf for a while and just kind of doing these other little more obligation things. And I never felt guilty about not wanting to go to Mass or anything like that, but there was still that desire to go because there was something good that was happening there. But it would have been very easy to slip away from going to Mass. And I think it's providential, the timing of the Lord having called me into seminary, because I think if I had been at the university for any longer, I think my heart would have hardened just all the more quickly, and I would have really clung to what I wanted to do, my own desires and things like that.
Setting God up on a shelf, as you yourself said, Did that have a consequence on your moral life?
It did. And when I was in high school, my dad was a sheriff, so a police officer, and I was typically a pretty good kid. But when I went off to college, I just thought this will be the time when I can enjoy drinking, partying, and I can remember at least 3 parties that I went to. And as I look back, I see the Lord's hand in it. I remember leaving the party thinking, this really wasn't everything that it seemed like it would be. Like all the music and all the different things you dream about what it might be like to go to a college party. It wasn't as much fun as I thought it was going to be, but I went a few more times to similar parties. And it was, I think when I got home, after having been away for 5 or 6 months, I went home for Christmas and Easter that year. And by the time I got home for Easter, I just felt really empty. I really didn't know why. But the desire to go forward seemed normal, it seemed like the normal path I should choose. But as I look back, I wasn't happy. I was just feeling very restless, anxious. And it's neat because my mom actually a couple times during the school year had asked me if something was wrong. And I remember getting frustrated with her saying, "No, Mom, nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. All these little internships, these job opportunities are lining up. Everything's falling into place." So she backed off and didn't really ask anymore. But it was when I went home for Easter that it was the first time I think I admitted to myself. I remember going to confession and telling the priest different things I had done in the past few months. And he told me, he said, "Well, that's not necessarily different from other college students," but he said, I'm not sure that you're happy with what you're doing. And I remember that struck me because it made me really reconsider if I was happy. And I didn't know the priest very well, but I thought it was interesting that he maybe picked up on something in my voice, or I don't know, however I presented myself, just in a confession. But it was providential that he asked that, because then I started asking the question, well, Lord, what would make me happy? Or what would you, not even as much what would you have me do, but just what would make me happy? So I think it was shortly after that the journey to seminary started.
What would you say to young people who are struggling with that tension between wanting to be a good person, wanting to go to Mass on Sunday, who have the basics of Catholic faith, but at the same time wanting to just have a good time partying?
I think looking back, something that I would have loved to have been asked, and I was never really asked this by a priest or by friends. However, I was told this by my parents. You're growing up and your parents say, we want you to be happy. But never once did I really think, what will make me happy? Other than getting a job and making money and just kind of doing the normal thing. Living comfortably was that seemed like happiness. But it was when I was at college that became more of a reality, the sense of what will make me happy. I'm going to Mass, I'm kind of doing these obligatory things, and I feel content, but it seems like there could be more. There could be something that would ultimately make me happier, I guess in a more complete way. So it was when I was home at the end of that school year that I admitted to myself, okay, I don't want to go back to Aquinas, to the university, but I have no idea what I'll do. And it was very quickly that the Lord spoke, and within 3 or 4 weeks, I was applying to seminary. But it was a very gradual, just soft, kind of like a whisper from our Blessed Mother. I started praying the Rosary on my drive to work. It was 25 minutes there and 25 minutes back.
Okay, you said that before you never prayed the Rosary. So how did that idea come into your mind? What made you want to pray it?
So I had to borrow my dad's car one day for work, and I found a Rosary CD in the little CD compartment of his car. And there was just this little desire, I've never prayed a Rosary. by myself before. I'm gonna put this CD in and pray along with the little recording of the lady. And it was beautiful, it was really peaceful. It had been a long time since I'd prayed a rosary, but I'd never prayed one by myself. So it was seeing that CD in the car that I decided to put it in. I thought, well, I know I've seen my dad pray this before, or I know he uses this CD in the car, so I'll try it. And it was Our Lady. It was ultimately a desire for silence, because normally on the way to work I would listen to music and all the top 40 fun poppy music. But I realized when I would get to work, I would kind of be in a bad mood. And I really didn't know why, but it was realizing that the music wasn't fulfilling, and I was trying to fulfill my happiness with something like music, which ultimately made me ask the question, is anything that I'm doing really making me happy, or why am I doing it? So it was the music and silence and the rosary that kind of pulled that initial call to the seminary together, which is neat.
Can you explain a little bit more exactly why you decided not to go back to Aquinas?
Yes. So ultimately it was because I just knew that I wasn't going to be any happier going back. The desire to go wasn't there, which was a big thing to admit, because for so long I had wanted to go to that school and pursue that degree, and so it was just kind of like letting go of what I thought was going to be the right thing, which was really hard. The idea of surrender, my sister one time told me, she said, just let go and let God. And that has always kind of stuck with me when I'm kind of clinging to my own plans over the Lord's. But it just took an initial question of, do I really want to go back? No, I don't. But I don't have any idea why or what I'll do instead.
Do you think that your desire of having an exact plan for your life was what affected your falling away from the plan of a coherent Christian life that God wanted for you?
I think it does, because when we only focus on ourselves, I look at myself in the past and I see that my desires were very selfish, and it was only kind of a seeking of what will make me immediately happy, but also with the desire to kind of control what I think will make me happy. So I think when we don't, for me anyways, when I couldn't surrender to God the plans for my future, it seemed like everything kind of fell into that. So as far as what it would look like to get married, or to have children, or even the using alcohol, like what's a good way to use this? So it was all kind of wrapped up in a desire to control my own life, I think.
You said that you were afraid of letting go so as to let God. Where did you get the courage to let go of your plans and let God take control?
This is a great question. So even today, it's hard to continually let go and let God have control of our lives. For myself, as I continue to go towards priesthood, I think this is the lifelong challenge. But in the beginning, what helped me was I read a book called Be a Man by Father Larry Richards, and at the end of the first chapter, he asks a question. He says, what would you like people to say about you at your funeral? So it was neat because it was the first time I'd ever thought about my own funeral as a 19-year-old, and this kind of memento mori, remember death, theme. And I remember sitting outside in my parents' house thinking, what would I want people to say about me at my funeral? And I realized I would hope they would say he was a good person, that he worked hard, and I realized that it wasn't so much he was a good man because he had this much money, or this many children, or this wife, this house, this car. I realized that I just hoped to be people would say I was a good person. That was the first time I'd ever thought about that. But I think that allowed me to surrender just a little bit in that moment, to say, well, what will it take for someone to say that I was a good person who, did ultimately what you wanted, Lord? And that was the other part of that, was as I thought about wanting to be remembered as a good person, I also remember wanting to be remembered as someone who loved God. And in a very simple way. That was just kind of a thought I'd had was, well, I would love to be remembered as someone who loved you. And then it kind of stopped after that.
In the last few minutes of this interview that are left, can you tell us a little bit about your vocation, how you felt the call, or what steps did you take to surrender your life to God?
So when I think back to high school, there were a couple priests who influenced my life, just people that I looked up to and who made the priesthood seem like an actual option. Like as far as a career, it was even like, oh, like the priesthood seems like a choice that I could follow that path. However, I didn't. Holding to my own plans. But when I went to college and then came home that summer, it was reading that book, the sense of remember death. What do you want people to say about you at your funeral? That really helped kind of set the road for what was to come later, because everything just kind of fell into place. When I called the diocese that I'm currently studying for in Michigan, they were excited. The priest I was talking to, I knew from high school. He said, I remember you at different youth retreats, and I always kind of hoped you might be a priest. So these little beautiful affirmations it wasn't a surprise to anybody. Even to my parents, they weren't surprised that I wanted to go into seminary. So it was, I think, the people who, first the book, but then the people who really kind of affirmed that this is what the Lord was calling me to. Because it's easy to try to just sit almost like in a dark room and say, Lord, what are you asking me to do? But when you have those affirmations from other people, it's helpful to see and to know how the Lord works is oftentimes through other people. So to have those affirmations from them was huge. And since then, those affirmations and the peace in my own heart has kept me going forward. That the priesthood is the calling or the right path that God has put me on.
One last question. What would you say to those young people who go out partying and don't know if they're doing right or wrong? The Lord is asking something of them, but they don't want to hear it because of what people might say. What would you say to them to make them understand why that's not the right path and to call them back to reaffirm their Catholic faith?
I think if at the end of the day, you can think about what you did during the day, and if you can ask yourself, am I happy? Or did the things I do actually fulfill me? Or did it bring me any kind of, what kind of pleasure or enjoyment did it bring? Did it bring something that was long-lasting, or was it kind of shallow? But I think the big question is, am I happy? Or do I enjoy what I'm doing? And I think for most young people, it's easy to say yes. I know I thought I was enjoying everything that I was doing at the time. But something that I look back on is the culture of people that I was around. So even for having good friends, the culture that all of us young people have kind of been brought up in, has really forced us to ask ourselves, what's your identity? Or has asked us to question any kind of truth that we know about even ourselves. So I think for any young people today, I would say don't look to society to tell you who you are or what will make you happy, but turn to people you trust, turn to God ultimately, but don't turn to society, because I think for me that was where I went wrong, was always looking to society to see what would make me happy during that year. And then it was after leaving that setting that I realized that it was kind of a lie in society, and it wasn't the truth.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me today.
Friends, let go and let God. Or just jump, but this time to fall into the hands of God. Little differences. Now society says, just go with the flow. Oh, you only have today. Yeah, but for what? Are you really happy at the end of the day? Yes, let go, but let go so as to let God, not society. Don't forget, our goal, our aim is God. Thanks. Thank you.